You have put gladness in my heart, more than when grain and wine and oil increase. Please be seated. What makes us happy? Or let me ask a more contemporary and perhaps even American version of that question. Is there a level of comfort or wealth or income or status that would, statistically speaking, make us happy? The answer is, according to a 2010 Princeton study, yes. Now, don't take this the wrong way. I do think there's nuance to it. But the survey asked thousands of people about their income level and their general sense of satisfaction. And it turned out, not a big surprise here, that it did help to have some income to feel satisfied. I think we know that if you are struggling just to make ends meet, it's very difficult to get beyond that place and feel comfortable, and we'll use the word happy. It's not necessary, but for most people, it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of money coming in. The same study, though, saw that at a certain point, greater wealth didn't actually help you become any happier. So the point is that there is a crossover point, and I'm not going to name any numbers here, but it's a lot lower than you might think. At which point, it doesn't do you any good to have more wealth, to have more money coming in for you to be happy. In fact, what this suggests is once you hit that crossover point, the more you have, the harder it becomes to be and stay and remain happy. And we're not talking about $3.5 million. That number is actually far closer to earth and reality than you might think. And that's kind of the point of the study. We know that if you're struggling just to survive, yes, it's hard to be happy. But yes, while it helps, that steady flow of income can only help you so far. It's only going to help you so much. So statistically speaking, I keep saying that, but in fact, I'm speaking common sense, that we can become so obsessed with things and with money that actually having them can erode our sense of happiness. The psalmist says to God, "You have put gladness in my heart, more than when grain and wine and oil increase." And this got me thinking about gladness. It's a very simple term. It's not at all new to Christianity. This comes to us from the Psalm, by the way. It doesn't require that we memorize a creed or believe in a particular thing or belong to the right place. It just says that contentment and joy are gifts of the Spirit, and that they are something that we can all have. You have put gladness in my heart, more than when grain and wine and oil increase. I lie down in peace. At once I fall asleep. I'm just struck by this idea of gladness. It is so beautiful, and it's amazing that gladness is completely untethered to the concept of increase. The gladness is there whether we have a whole lot of bread and wine or not. Indeed, it may well be that the more our granaries burst with surplus, the harder it becomes for us to experience gladness. If we can hear this as the psalmist's contemporaries would have, or Jesus' contemporaries would have, we would see something very real and immediate. These staples were the necessities of life. Grain was needed for everyday nutrition. Wine was not only something they knew would be safe to drink, but also a way of experiencing celebration and companionship and joy. Oil was needed for cooking and health and for purification. So these were really important elements to the life of someone who heard this psalm for the first time. Now, maybe we don't think of them quite that way. We think of those are just things that we get from a grocery store. But we do have our own sense of dependence. The stock market value of grain and the daily price of light sweet crude does influence our financial security and our whole financial well-being. But it does not get us any closer to gladness. Gladness is joy. It is peace. It is faith in the one who created us and moves through us and who calls each and every one of us beloved. Gladness is contentment. That rare gift of seeing the abundance of God all around us in times of plenty, but also in times of trial. It's the gift of experiencing the simple joy of being alive, of looking up to the sky and seeing a total eclipse, of being inspired by the creativity and wonder of the God who created it, and then at the end of that day to lie down in peace and to fall asleep, and to then wake up the next day, Tuesday, ready to see the next windfall of grace so that we may become vessels for that same peace and love of God. Gladness is contentment. This idea of gladness, we read of it in the Psalms, but in some ways, it's almost the cutting edge of faith today. You see, we're uncovering so many ways that we have grounded our faith, our church, our life together over the many centuries in things that might have given us a sense of identity or even power, but do not reflect a loving God and do very little to actually show us what it means to be in relationship with a loving God. Things which may have very well blocked our pathways to gladness. It's what Michael Curry says so often: if it's not about love, then it's not about God. That is a deceptively simple statement, because in that we have a plumb line to hold up all of these things that we say are important to us in the life of our faith. But if it does not point us in the way of this deeper sense of contentment in God, in the sense of gladness, then it may not be what we're supposed to be looking at after all. And the psalmist knew this. The psalmist knew that idolatry was a false gladness. And that's why idolatry is right here in this same passage. That when we give our hearts to dumb idols, I love hearing that word in Scripture, and I love hearing it sung by the choir, because it's always been like, you know, in our word, it's kind of an insult, right? But dumb means mute, cannot speak. I am worshiping a rock that cannot speak back to me. That's just absurd. And then in our contemporary parlance, it's just, well, that's just kind of dumb. It's kind of silly. Well, it really works both ways. The idol is not going to do anything for us, and yet we give our hearts to them. And yet we give over the very things that allow us to find that gladness that is the true gift of God. You can be, we'll talk about idols, you can be financially secure with a lottery win. But you are going to have a whole lot more drama in your life. And you're going to have to work a lot harder to guard your heart against the jealousy and loneliness that come with that kind of big payout. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying we wouldn't all like to try. But I am saying that we face a whole lot more hurdles if gladness is what really matters, and I do believe that gladness is what really matters. Idolatry gets in the way of gladness. But you know, something else through these many centuries has plagued us and has gotten us focused on the path that is not the way towards contentment and joy. And we see the very beginning of it here in Peter's speech or sermon to the Jewish people. Now, I'm going to give Peter the benefit of the doubt. This is a hard passage for us to listen to, knowing what we do about anti-Semitism, knowing what we do about how Christians throughout the centuries have demonized those who are different from us. But I'm going to give Peter the benefit of the doubt as he castigates the Jewish people for not seeing in Jesus the Messiah that he was, and then blaming them for Jesus' death. Actually, no, I am not going to let Peter off the hook. His sermon, to me, has a bit of a ring of protesting too much. This is just a tiny bit of time after the crucifixion and resurrection where Peter was really kind of late to the game to really figure out what was going on. And it almost sounds in this passage like Peter is trying to offload his own feelings of guilt and perhaps even shame onto the Jewish people. I wonder if it's Peter who needs to grow a bit, because I don't think he's quite earned the right to flare out his peacock feathers this much. But you know, giving Peter the benefit of the doubt, the real sin is that we as the church have taken this passage, have taken this moment as a warrant, as a proof text for pushing the Jewish people out of the frame and replacing them with us, with ourselves. One of the deeper questions is there gladness in this? No, this is simply replacing one tribe with another. It is exceptionalism by another name. Now, I'm really not saying this was Peter's intention. I don't believe that it was. But we as a church have looked for centuries back on this text, and we have done exactly that. It has been used time and again as a proof text for anti-Semitism and ultimately for Christian supremacy in all its forms. And I would hold that and any number of heresies up to this test. Is it ultimately about gladness? Is it a generative gladness that grows by being shared, that has little or nothing to do with the increase in wine or grain, one that is rooted in a faithful sense of contentment? So how do we get there? How do we get to gladness? Or if we think we once had it but have lost it, how do we return? How do we get it back? Well, I believe that this sense of gladness comes to us. It returns to us through our hearts and through our bodies. Jesus returns, and he stands among the disciples, scaring the heck out of them, by the way. This was the biggest jump scare in history, because he shows up and he says, "Peace be with you. Peace be with you." Now that's a part of our service. We say that. We turn to one another in the service and we say exactly that, "Peace be with you." Now, I didn't know until actually just a few years ago, because I didn't grow up in the Episcopal Church. I didn't know that there are generations of folks in the pews or the chairs who didn't pass the peace until 1979. I see a few heads nodding. I was shocked to learn this. I was like, well, what did you do? Do you mean you just sat in the pews and didn't touch anybody or look at anybody for years? And they're like, well, yeah, it was great. Oh no, but it is a part of our service, and it's there for a reason. And I say that hoping because I know we've had COVID. We've had changes where we were understandably careful about how we approach that. And I really hope that we can return and on one hand honor those who we know do need some protection, and touching is not good. But I also want us to think about, for those who are comfortable with that, to remember what the peace is, that it's an embodied sense of seeing one another and feeling the gladness of being in one another's presence. I think it calls from us a new repertoire of how we approach one another during the peace, because you got to read body language. Some people just want the fist bump. Some people want the bear hug. Some people want the namaste. Work on all those. It is an exercise in self-awareness to make it work, but it can work. The peace is physical, and it's even a little bit intimate. It began as the kiss of peace. And it's intentional, that there's this moment in the service where, if we're okay with it, we actually touch one another. We actually look in the eyes of another beloved of God. In this wonderful passage where Jesus is known by the disciples, where he walks with them, where he eats with them, where he offers the first peace, we see what gladness looks and feels like. Gladness comes in companionship, when as friends they break bread together and share a meal. Gladness comes in openness, the kind of openness and vulnerability when we greet one another in Christ, when we look one another in the eye. Gladness comes in recognition, when we are suddenly and joyfully aware that we are in the presence of the risen Lord. Gladness is contentment. It is the gift of quiet joy that comes from having an innate and rooted sense of our own God-given belovedness. You have put gladness in my heart.